aproveito para avisar que o evento está sendo gravado. Gostaria de dar novamente as boas-vindas a todos e todas que estão aqui conosco hoje. Em nome da ICF Brasil, obrigado pela presença na nossa International Coaching Week de 2025, a maior celebração global de coaching profissional no mundo. E esse ano é ainda mais especial, porque a gente está celebrando os 30 anos da ICF no mundo. Gostaria de agradecer especialmente aos nossos patrocinadores Ouro, Stream e IO, Nexi e Prata LHH. Eu sou Arthur Fonseca, sou coach voluntário da ICF, sou nosso diretor de responsabilidade social por esse biênio, e comigo no apoio está a Silmara Pereira, nós dois do capítulo Minas Gerais. Queria agradecer também a Clélia, que está aí apoiando sempre a todas as sessões, e a Juliana, que é a nossa intérprete para o evento de hoje. A ICF é a maior associação global de coaching, presente em mais de 140 países e com mais de 60 mil membros ao redor do mundo. Durante essa semana, de 12 a 18 de maio, a gente está celebrando a International Coaching Week, com eventos em mais de 20 idiomas, como vocês devem saber. E aqui no Brasil, uma programação especial, inclusive com palestrantes como o de hoje, de fora do Brasil, referências em diversos temas que podem nos ajudar no nosso trabalho como coaches. O link para a programação completa vai ser compartilhado no chat, assim como os links para as nossas postagens no Instagram e no LinkedIn. Então, como eu falei, esse evento está sendo gravado. Gostaria de pedir a todos que respeitem os acordos que a gente fez com os nossos palestrantes no sentido de não trazer inteligências artificiais para fazer registro da sessão. Então, por gentileza, se alguém tiver trazido, pedimos que retirem da sala a inteligência artificial. E lembrando que vocês vão poder, ao final do evento, solicitar o seu certificado de participação. A gente vai mandar, ao final, um link para um formulário que vocês devem preencher. Vai ser uma pequena avaliação da sessão, bem como a forma de solicitação do certificado de participação. Para cada evento da ICF, é necessário que você responda à pesquisa, para que a gente possa colher os feedbacks e também oferecer os certificados. Queria lembrar que a gente está divulgando agora na International Coaching Week também um programa novo de coaching pro bono, que é com a Ensina Brasil. A gente já está em andamento com outro programa de coaching também com uma instituição de educação, mas agora a gente gostaria de dar visibilidade para o programa com a Ensina Brasil. A Ensina Brasil desenvolve lideranças que vão atuar como professores e professoras em escolas públicas de comunidades vulneráveis por 2 anos, preparando eles para liderar as mudanças nos diversos setores. Então, o trabalho deles é formar professores que são especialmente treinados, capacitados para impactarem não só como alunos daquelas organizações, daquelas escolas, mas como influenciadores pela melhoria da qualidade do ensino público no Brasil. E aí, como coach da ICF, a gente vai poder apoiar eles nessa jornada de desenvolvimento, ajudando eles a superarem desafios e potencializarem o propósito de transformar as realidades nas quais eles se encontram. Gostaria, por gentileza, que a Silmara talvez já tenha até compartilhado, compartilhasse aí no chat o link para se inscrever para o programa. Gostaria de lembrar também que a gente conta com tradução simultânea. Vocês podem acionar essa opção clicando em More ou Mais na parte de baixo do Zoom, clicando no ícone do globo Interpretation e escolhendo o idioma no qual vocês gostariam de ouvir essa palestra. Então, gostaria de dar as boas-vindas para a Ludmila, que está aqui conosco. A Ludmila é especialista em neurodiversidade e vai poder se apresentar logo mais aqui para nós. Vou falar somente um pouquinho de todo o trabalho dela e das referências. Ela é autora de um livro chamado Código do Canário, em tradução livre, um guia para a neurodiversidade, dignidade e pertencimento interseccional no trabalho. Ela é listada como uma das tops em novos livros sobre gestão pela Thinker 50 e também é uma professora de psicologia industrial organizacional na Vanguard University do sul da Califórnia e um membro do radar de Thinker 50 que é um grupo de pensadores em práticas de gestão global, que impacta os lugares de trabalho. Ludmila, muitíssimo obrigado por estar aqui conosco hoje. Estamos prontos para aprender com você. Ao longo da sessão, por gentileza, coloquem as perguntas de vocês no chat, que ao final da fala da Ludmila, nós levaremos as perguntas para que ela responda. Muito obrigado, Ludmila. É com você.
Thank you for this wonderful introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you. I'm thrilled to be able to meet your group and talk about neurodiversity because I'm very, very passionate about this topic. And in a couple of minutes, I'm also going to ask you where you are in your journey with neurodiversity and understanding of it. So think about it for a second. Now I'll just introduce myself very quickly, and then I'm going to uh, ask you to introduce who you are and how much do you know about neurodiversity. Now, it's a topic that obviously has been around since late 90s, especially when we developed the term neurodiversity. But even in just the last few years, globally, we see more and more conversation about how we can improve understanding of neurodiversity among various groups and specifically in the workplace. But there have been more and less effective ways to address it. So I hope we'll talk about some of the most effective ways that you can use instead of some of the things that have been tried and did not work quite well. So that is hopefully what I can talk about. And obviously, I'm not going to cover everything that's in my book, but you can check that out. And there is a lot more there that you could hopefully also use in your practice. This is something that I've been passionate about for a long time, but I did not start in neurodiversity. I've been working in neurodiversity for the last 5 to 6 years, but for most of my career, I've actually been in global diversity and looking at national level cultures and how to create better international relations. And then I started looking at all the different other types of diversity: gender, class, race, education. And really, when I started thinking in terms of neurodiversity, it's an approach that can help with all the other differences because when we're looking at how our cultures, our class, our education are reflected in who we are. All of those things are reflected in psychological processes along with our biological wiring. So when we start talking about psychological level differences, we really cover everything starting from human biology and human culture. But we kind of forget about this level of individual differences very often when we design work environments. So my passion is to really bring better understanding of neurodiversity into work environments. So now I had a couple of questions because I wanted to learn about you. And we have a couple of polls. I don't know if you want me to administer or, okay, so there you are. So how familiar you are with neurodiversity and neuroaffirming practices. I would just want to know if you're just starting learning, if you kind of have some knowledge, might have watched some videos, have taken a class or two, or maybe you are trying this a little bit in your own work, or maybe you've been actively working in this field. So I just want to figure out uh, does the general feel for who is in the room and how we can best help you with this session. Okay, we have some beginners, and now we're starting to see some people who have a little bit more understanding. All right. So it looks like most people here are just starting to learn. And then we have some people who have been studying a little bit. And some people with experience, at least to some extent. I don't know if you're modest or nobody really has a lot of experience, but nobody said that you have a lot of experience.
Should I close the poll?
Yes, I think we're ready to project.
Can everyone see the results?
I think we need to say share results. Yeah. So you can see them?
Now everyone should see.
So yes, so thank you for sharing, and it's definitely very helpful. You do not have to be an expert. And we're going to start with terminology and make sure everyone is on the same page. But it's very helpful for me to know just how deep do we maybe want to go on some examples. And again, please feel free to ask me questions. There's plenty of time at the end, but if there's something that you really, really need to clarify, put it in the chat and I will try to see it. And we'll definitely try to cover a lot of ground that's foundational and then drill maybe a little bit more in depth into a couple of topics. Now, I have a second question about what is it that you would hope to get out of this session. And there are 4 options, but in case those options really do not work for you, then maybe you can try looking at the uh, chat and just see if you can give us something else. Do you have the second question? Do you have the second poll?
Well, we only now is only in the chat box if they would like to add something.
Okay. Okay, never mind. So if I thought there was a second poll, but if you would just want to put in the chat if there is something that you particularly would like to learn from this particular session, please let me know and I will try to look at it and I will try to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. But let's go and look at some of the terminology because terminology is very confusing in this particular area. And there are many people who have very heated arguments about the meaning of those words. So not everyone agrees on it. I try to draw on the original writing on the topic and people who develop that terminology to make sure we are honoring their work and using terminology in ways that make sense to everyone. So when we're talking about neurodiversity in general, this is a concept that describes humanity, like biodiversity describes life on Earth. Neurodiversity describes humanity. It's not a feature of one individual, but as a group, we as humans have a lot of diversity in how we develop, how we learn about the world. Some of us tend to be more quiet, and some of us like to study one topic in depth. Others are much more social and they like engage with a variety of things. And those things are not necessarily bad because as groups, we need people who are quiet and we need people who are more social and we need people who pay in-depth attention to detail and make sure things work as intended. And we also need people who are quick to respond to everything in the environment. Because if we're all the same, it's not going to be a very healthy group. Healthy group like healthy forest or healthy ocean. We need to have variety of types of life. The same with humanity and human society. We need to have different talents. We need to have different types of people to create a functioning and healthy society. But sometimes people decide that we like certain differences, but we don't like the other differences, and we don't like people to behave in certain ways. And to significant extent, it comes from culture. So if you can think about Brazilian culture and US culture, and let's say Japanese culture, there are some differences in what would be considered normal or desirable, how you behave in society, how you behave in the workplace. And if you think about now and 200 years ago and 500 years ago, those norms also change. So those ideals about how we should be, what's considered desirable, they change by time and space. And that's the idea of neuronormativity. The society tells us what's normal, what's desirable, and what's not normal. And we don't usually like the word normal in neurodiversity studies, so we put it in quotes because normal is very relative. And if I just declare that one particular kind of behavior is normal, so for example, always sitting still and paying attention and never moving around, like for example, in some very rigid schools, then many kids are going to have trouble with this definition of normal because they're just not wired for sitting still for a long period of time. And if we keep telling them they're bad and inadequate because of this, we really are going to create a lot of stress and trauma. And by the way, many children with ADHD get many times more negative feedback than other people, for example, because what's kind of how they're wired, we declared it bad and not normal and not desirable, and they're just constantly told that what they're doing is bad and wrong. And that obviously can create issues that actually weren't there before. So neuronormative description kind of gives us an idea what's neurotypical, the people who are fitting in with society. So if society is more gregarious and social, then people who fit with it are extroverts, are kind of considered normal. And then people who tend to not like too much social stimulation and they like to spend more of their time alone. It's not like they don't like people. Sometimes they're happy to listen, but they don't always necessarily want to talk or be in a large group or just constantly have stimulation because it's actually just a lot for their brains to process. And then we kind of label them as different because they don't fit. And so if you're not neurotypical, if you don't easily conform to those expectations that your culture determined to be normal, then you might be considered neurodivergent. And it could be for a variety of reasons. So I mentioned ADHD. So ADHDers would be neurodivergent people. I would be considered a neurodivergent person because I'm autistic, and also people who have depression or anxiety or acquired neurodivergence, such as brain trauma or long COVID. Neurodivergence is a very broad umbrella, and many different people fit under that. Now, neurominority is a little bit more narrow term coined by Nick Walker to specifically refer to people who are born different. And it's inseparable from who we are. It's not like we developed that difference later in life. Our brains were wired differently from the beginning, and then society also decided that this is bad. So particular autistic characteristics, for example, the need to spend a lot of in-depth time studying our topics of interest. Somehow society disabled this is not nice, and we're called names when we just enjoy our studies and try to focus in depth on our topics of interest, and we get bullied for that. So the autistic people would be also example of neurominority or dyslexic people. So if that's a difference that's hardwired into us and is inseparable for who we are, and receives some kind of bullying and mistreatment, we talk about as ourselves as neurodiversity, as neurominorities. And finally, sometimes people call individuals neurodiverse, and it's okay when you're just learning to use it like that. But generally, we say that neurodiversity is a group level phenomenon, and we are neurodiverse as humanity. A group is neurodiverse because in the group, you're going to have neurotypical people and dyslexic people and autistic people and maybe someone who is prone to social anxiety. So your group is going to be neurodiverse. But when we refer to individuals, we call them neurodivergent or members of neurominority groups. And we reserve neurodiverse to the group level explanation. So that's just kind of to lay the foundation of how we use terminology. But obviously behind that terminology are very real humans and how they're treated. And that is really what's important. And how we use that terminology can also impact how people are treated. That in turn comes from underlying assumptions. So I just used labels like ADHD or dyslexia, and those are unfortunately inherited from medical model. We have not yet developed a language that's not stigmatizing. Now, they tried to do it in New Zealand in developing using original Maori culture and meanings in those cultural settings, and they came up with certain words like "Arorotini for ADHD, attention goes to many places," which is just a description and not a medical label. But we're not there yet. So a lot of our terminology comes from medical model. And sometimes it says, okay, so this person is different and maybe they're not fitting in the society. Okay, let's treat it. Let's change this person. Let's make this person fit in. And that is very often, let's say, how autistic people have been treated in the society from the deficit perspective. But even if our cultures are behind on developing better non-stigmatizing language, we can still change our assumptions about what those differences mean. And we will not say, oh, you know what, autistic people are disordered and they're problematic. No, it's a difference from the neurodiversity paradigm, from the neurodiversity perspective. It's a difference. And society needs some people who just are going to be very happy to spend a lot of time studying a topic in depth and getting to know everything about it. And it's not a bad characteristic. And there are some people who communicate differently. Now, let's say many autistic people tend to be very direct in their communication. Well, is it necessarily a bad thing? Or does society need people who will occasionally, even if other people will not tell the truth, will tell the truth because it's important? So it's a difference that could actually be very helpful in society. So what we need to think about is how do we respect, accept, and put emphasis on strength of neurodivergent people rather than saying, okay, something's wrong with you and we need to train you how to stop telling the truth, which there actually have been some problems for how to teach autistic children to lie. So yeah, let's think about that. People should tell other people to tell the truth and not necessarily tell autistic people how to lie. So how we approach those differences is a matter of cultural assumptions rather than actually, okay, you've been labeled in medical terminology and therefore everything you do is wrong. We need to challenge that thinking. And Harvey Bloom, who first used the term neurodiversity in print in his brief article in the Atlantic magazine in 1998 says that neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for human race as biodiversity in general. He did not invent that term. It was invented in early 90s internet chat rooms where autistic people came together and talked about life. And they said, you know what, maybe it should be treated as diversity and not a labeled medical problem. And then people like Harvey Bloom and Judy Singer started using that term in writing and either public general public magazines or in scientific research. So it's a lot of human thinking that went into developing neurodiversity paradigm from people just trying to deal with their daily life to academics who had since studied it. And we're trying to bring more of this neurodiversity thinking into everything, schools and healthcare and workplaces, but it's hard work. And sometimes we make progress, and sometimes we kind of feel like people are getting us to go back, and change is never linear. So I think we're getting waves, but we're getting always in societal progress, even if it's not linear. So hopefully we will see more and more application of neurodiversity paradigm in various settings. And there has been a lot of interesting work of applying it in both education and the workplace. And there's one concept that is really, really helpful, regardless of what difference you're talking about. You can be talking about dyslexia or nonverbal learning difference, or you can talk about ADHD. So you can talk about a variety of situations. And one thing that's very often is pronounced is that it's not a flat thing, like everything is bad or everything is good. People have very different abilities. And what is interesting about neurodivergent people is that there are higher what we call valleys and peaks in their profiles. So this is academic profile, but you can also talk about those things as a social profile. How much or how well do they talk or listen, or how many friends do they have, or how deeply they go into their friendships. But in general, we know that nobody is, all bad or all good. We can think about maybe neurotypical people as, okay at many things. Maybe you're B plus student who is okay at different things. But then we can think about neurodivergent people as a student who can be A plus in some things and C minus or a D in other things. So for example, some people could be really good with their language and with reading or with oral presentations and be super creative, but then make them do algebra and they just kind of dead. And that would be me actually. So the yellow profile is pretty similar to how I am. And so give me any kind of reading task or creativity task. I'm wonderful, but make me do equations or multitask. I'm literally completely hopeless at those things. And you don't want to average abilities because it doesn't make sense. Just put someone into doing what they're good at and just watch magic happen. We don't want people to spend most of their life trying to remedy those things that they're bad at. What we really want in the productivity scheme is to hire different kinds of people in the workplace, and some are going to be like me and hopeless at multitasking. It doesn't make sense to force me to multitask because I'll never be wonderful at it. My brain is not wired for multitasking, but there are people who are wired for multitasking, even though they say like we're never perfect at it, but some people are going to be much better than I am. So just hire that person for the parts of the jobs or the types of the jobs that require multitasking and let them thrive. They might actually enjoy this kind of fast-paced environment and doing a lot of different things. And then someone who enjoys getting into details and depth or of one topic, well, let them do that. And again, see higher productivity. Just help people align with where their best productivity is, rather than try to force them to spend their life trying to remedy those issues that, again, it might be just easier to get people with different talents and assign them to different tasks than to force someone who is not good at something to improve, or hire everyone who is a B student. What makes more sense? To hire B student for every task, or to hire A plus people to do the task where they are A plus, and then for other things, hire other people who are able to do A plus work. Your overall productivity in the workplace is going to be much higher in the second scenario. So that's really one of the things of working with strengths that we're talking about here, when we are trying to bring more neurodiversity differences awareness into the workplace, but you can also think about it in education and many other realms. Now, well, there are some things that have been popular, but are not necessarily the best way to think about our differences. So one kind of problematic type of thinking is in mixing up neurodivergence and disability and disorders, because some people do experience those conditions as highly debilitating. But if you remember the examples of neurodivergence that I had previously, one of those examples was giftedness. And people do not always necessarily equate giftedness with disability, even though you're always bullied for giftedness. That could be a problem, but it's not necessarily a disability. And even, things like ADHD or autism, in one set of circumstances, for example, give me a quiet place and, leave me alone, and I will do something amazing. I'm not disabled, but put me in the open office with a lot of noise, and my brain is going to turn into, oatmeal in 3 minutes. So, it's kind of a disability and not a disability depending of context, because in the quiet place, I will outwork 99% of the people. And in the noisy place, that's a completely different situation. So very often we need to think about not just it's a disability or disorder, even though in some cases people do experience it as a disability. But in some cases, it's just we are not creating right environment for those people. Some people need written instructions instead of verbal instructions, and they're perfect. And it's really not very hard to do. And the disability part could be really disappearing disability if we just do very basic things of respecting our difference. They're not even any kind of complicated accommodations. Sometimes they could be, but in many cases, they're just basic common sense. Treat people how they need to be treated and help them work in their best way. Very basic common sense things. And another myth that's very popular is that there are specific superpowers associated with neurodivergent differences, which again, it sounds good. But it's also in part reaction to those horrendous unemployment numbers, which would be 30–40% for all neurodivergent people in the US, and over 80% for autistic people with college degrees. So those could make you say, but there are superpowers among our people. Of course, it's just not always true. Yes, there are some autistic people who are very good with tech. And there are other people who are very good with creative things. And there are some dyslexic people who are creative and some people who really don't care about creative work. But if you try to steer them into specific work, whether it's creative or tech or entrepreneurship, it's going to work for some of them, but it's not going to reduce overall unemployment by significant percentage because we're all different and we all have very different patterns of abilities. So looking for those superpowers and creating opportunities for superpowers only creates opportunities for a small number of people, which is wonderful for them. But most people are still going to get left out. And also, while it's done supposedly for good reasons, and it's a benevolent and well-meaning thing that we do, it's still stereotyping. And stereotyping is overgeneralization. And even if it is positive, it can be a problem. It can create stress. And you will say, okay, you are expected to be a genius in math, or you're expected to be a genius in arts because of label, and you're not. That's unnecessary stress on the person who probably already has a hard enough life without that. So trying to force people into just those stereotypical powers can be an issue. And yes, some of us have superpowers, but very often they're also contextual. So autistic superpower is very often good memory. Not everyone, but I can recite pages and pages of poetry, and that's nice and helps at school if your school likes you to recite poetry. But it also makes me remember all the bullying and all the horrible things that anyone said to me since I was 4 years old. And that's not a good thing that I want to remember. And I would rather not remember this stuff. So sometimes this memory can also put you at risk of PTSD because you literally can't forget all those horrible things. And so again, it's kind of even if it could be defined as superpower, it's not always a good thing. It's very, very contextual. So that's why we have to be really careful by saying, oh, but you've got superpowers. Maybe, maybe not. And I definitely shouldn't be expected to have superpowers to be just treated with basic human dignity and basic human respect anyway, because we all worthy whether we have superpowers or not. And the final myth is we need to focus on business case. Well, okay, yes, business case is important, but people have taken it very far again, and it can be dehumanizing because, okay, I need to bring the business case for, my employment, which is basically in the Western world, my existence, and other people don't. Where's the business case for hiring neurotypicals? And why do neurodivergent people have to prove their value? So that's kind of like a moral side of it. But also we need to be much more careful at trying to, let's say, put those things or hire people for those particular positions because they bring special value. Research by Georgia again Rattan shows that that actually makes people feel othered, and they're less likely to take a job when there is a strong business case presented for why they should be hired. And that's because we don't want to be singled out and be presented like, well, for us, we need to have this special argument to be hired, even though everybody else doesn't. They just hired, just because. So business case has several psychological and ethical issues with it, like othering and reducing people to production tools. So we have to be careful when using it. There are numbers. We do have wonderful companies that show increased productivity and quality, but We also know that good work organization and inclusive practices help everyone increase their productivity. So we shouldn't just tie that, okay, if you want to increase your productivity, so also hire autistic people. And some people have said that literally, like hire autistic people because they do twice the work for the same salary or for less money. That's, I can see some people liking that as a business case, but you can also see that there are a variety of ethical issues with that type of thinking. So business case sometimes can be taken a little bit too far, and we just need to be careful with how much we emphasize it. And obviously, it's complicated work, and nothing is going to be perfect here, and nothing is going to work 100%. So there are a few things that have been tried over the years that just don't work too well. And one thing that research shows is not enough is to try to change neurodivergent people. And there have been many programs where they will say, okay, so we'll teach autistic people social skills, or we'll teach autistic people to, plan better or do other workplace training. Well, the research that looked at multiple studies like that, and the results show that yes, neurodivergent people learn skills and improve, but it does not help them in being hired or building their careers because we're not changing systems. Systems are still biased, systems are still prejudiced. So if we are giving people skills, but we throw them into the same biased systems, it's just not enough. And it can actually backfire. So here's a story from my book of the real person, Charlie Hart, who lives in the United Kingdom, and she worked in HR, and she was really, really, really good at her job. And people would say, okay, you eat load for breakfast, which basically means you do way more work than the average person in your position. But they were not quite pleased with her personality. They felt like she needed to be more cheerful and, more participating in chat and banter and just more personable. So they decided to get someone to teach her how to be all those different things. In a way, they tried to change her personality and they tried to change her wiring. And long story short, she developed very deep depression because all of those trying to change who she was went against, again, who she was wired to be. And it brought up all the trauma and all the times when she was mistreated earlier in life. And again, she was doing a great job. And it's not like she was making enemies or being rude to people on purpose. And she really was just doing her job and just not fitting with this particular ideal of what they wanted to see. And trying to change her really did not work very well. And then eventually she ended up with a late in life diagnosis of ADHD and autism, but not before she really had to deal with a severe depression that came after this workplace intervention where they tried to change how she presented her personality. And again, there are many cases like that, unfortunately, and it's heartbreaking how sometimes people are hurt by that kind of intervention where people trying to change them so they're just easier for others to put their finger on, and then others don't have to change their communication skills. And that can be very, very difficult. And this pressure to mask and to be not who you are is something that causes neurodivergent people a lot of anxiety, depression, and can really cause a lot of trauma. other thing that I kind of mentioned with myth is label-based hiring. So let's hire autistic tech workers. Those programs work. You do hire some people, but in the entire US, it's under 2,000 people through those special programs. That does not make a dent in unemployment. You really need to try to create across industries and across different types of organization environments where autistic people could exercise their talents, as well as dyslexic people, ADHDers, people who experience trauma, people who have social anxiety, and all kinds of other things. We just need to create more welcoming and flexible environments for everyone. And also search for superpowers. Again, works for some people, but it's a small percentage of people that is not enough to make a dent for unemployment. Again, it's someone who could probably say that, I've got superpowers. But you know what? Superpowers are not always there, and they don't make us any better than anyone else. And we really should not expect people to have superpowers to be treated like everyone else in society. So those things have been kind of dead-ish at best, ounce, and that they might have helped some people, especially those hiring programs, but for the most part, they do not solve the unemployment problem and other difficulties that disproportionately are experienced by neurodivergent people. So how can we do better and build better work environments and opportunities for all of us? Really, we need to create more flexible environments, and we need to support people based on who they are in neuroaffirming ways, not trying to make them into someone they're not, and then we might support you if you just change yourself to fit my mold. That's not particularly fair to humans. So how that could apply to coaching? In my example, the worker, Charlie, was the one who was getting coached. Well, how about if we flip that and taught her boss or her coworkers how to communicate with neurodivergent people and be more neuro-inclusive and create environments where we are okay with some people being more reserved, and we don't label them as, bad people if they didn't do their social rounds instead of working. So how do we create environments where different types of people thrive, where different kinds of emotional and personal expression are welcomed and respected? And then, yes, so sometimes everyone could benefit from coaching, but it's a very different thing with neurodivergent people. If you trying to coach us to be someone else or to fit and pretend to be someone you're not, or better our lives, but with full respect for who we are, with our experience and our reality, and trying to help us to take charge, make choices for ourselves, understanding the consequences, but making our individual choices. Do we want to behave differently? Or do we want to self-advocate for a more inclusive environment? What makes sense for us where we are? Do we want to say, how do I address my lack of sociability? How do I force to be more pleasant? Okay, so that's one thing. I don't know how well it translates, but sometimes you need to be more pleasant. Well, pleasant for whom? What if me being pleasant for others is experienced as huge stress and unpleasantness for me? And am I really that being unpleasant if I'm just doing my job? It's not like I'm hurting anyone, but people sometimes, take affront if you're just working and focusing on work. And many autistic people do it, and then we get labeled as bad people for no reason, but we were just too busy doing our jobs, and we didn't notice other things that were happening. And do we want to change it? Do we want to label it as unpleasantness, or is it really just deep focus on work? Let's just call it that, and not how It could be labeled, and other things like lazy or disorganized. Okay, what are some of the other ways to think about those things? So we'll do an exercise in a minute, trying to relabel and say, well, is it laziness, or do we just pay more attention to some things because we're intrinsically motivated, and then other things are less motivating for us? And maybe we need to be better mesh with what we're doing rather than labeling us. But this is just kind of a big framework, how we can think about neurodiversity in terms of coaching. From the pathology model, I'll just say, well, if something's wrong with that person, let's change that person. Let's make them be more cheerful and more chatty in the workplace, and we'll tell them how to do it. So like in Charlie's case, someone was telling her how to, ask people more often about their personal life and so forth, because that's how you're supposed to do it. And it's very kind of hierarchical. I know better, and you should complain and do as I say, and you just need to become more pleasant, or you need to become more flexible. And it's really can be very, very high pressure on the person. It's something that could be done with children. Many people have issues with behavioral training with children because it basically teaches you not to have your free will and always comply. And the same thing with adults. It's not something that helps us to develop really in alignment with who we are. And if you think about it from a more neuroaffirming perspective, how about we respect who we are and we help people develop in the ways they're naturally inclined to develop, just through better self-understanding and growth, with the goal of not being just, one of the other clones in the clone army, but how do you flourish as a person in your unique way? So that's a goal that's very different than trying to make everyone the same. And then coaches are much more collaborative and supportive in ways that individuals can develop their agency, their ability to choose, their ability to self-advocate for aligning environments with who they are, and for encouraging others to help them develop their strengths rather than keep paying attention to all those perceived deficits. So it's about individuals, it's about their autonomy, it's about their interest and what works for them, as a big general way to think about it. And I'm sure many of you are doing a little bit better than that British coach that didn't work really well for Charlie, and which again is a true story. You can find that person on LinkedIn, and she will tell her herself that that was a true story. But unfortunately, there are people who suffer from bad interventions, and we try to minimize that and create interventions that are more supportive. So now let's do something. We can probably just do it in the chat. So let's try it in the chat. Unless you think we need to do the breakout rooms, but I think chat will be quicker. Let's just think about all those labels. So you are obsessive, or you're too destructible, or you're rude, or whatever. Just pick any one of those that should be reframed, or how you would reframe it into something that's not necessarily bad, but it's just a difference. And maybe it's something that can help in our self-understanding, but it's not a term that would tear us down. So if you would like to just take a minute and put different things in the chat that you think how you would reframe. For example, is obsessive what we call, you are obsessive if you are, let's say, very detail oriented. Okay. what are the better ways to think about it? Or is it always bad to not be flexible? Does it make sense? Okay, so let me see if we can get a few. How do you help people flourish in their own way? Yeah, so I see some nice notes so far. So let's just give me a few ideas. Okay, so obsessive, focused or persistent, rude, direct to the point. Exactly. We're just not trying to veil or hide something. We're just telling it as is. Determine, okay. Okay. Rude, not polite. And we can also think about how our culture defines politeness within our organization specifically. Anything else? Is there some redeeming quality to laziness? Okay, rude could be assertive, and people just don't like your assertiveness because they prefer to, walk over you. Disorganized, maybe not attached, okay. Depends on the context and what needs to be in considerations by all. Okay, lazy takes your time and follows your procedure. And definitely there are many ways to think about all of those in much less stigmatizing ways because disorganized, it could be someone who has many different interests and they might actually be working in a non-linear way. I'm disorganized, but I get things done. And you just work, yeah, so dynamic and multi-layered order. Yes, and those piles where you know where everything is, but it looks like a disaster to everyone else. But it just, your order looks different and you know where to find everything. Exactly. And again, sometimes people just want to slap something together and get it going. And if someone wants to make sure it's actually going to work, they could be called obsessive, but they're actually not obsessive. They're really concerned about quality, right? So it could be a very good thing. And again, lazy, well, lazy is kind of selectively motivated, and that's very often how it works for neurodivergent people. We have interest-based brains, and if we're interested in something and super motivated, we're going to move mountains. But if something is just not intrinsically motivated, uh, it's just not going to happen. So we're very much driven by intrinsic motivation. And if something maybe just doesn't make sense for us or is extrinsically imposed, we're much less likely to do well here or relax. Exactly. Uh, we sometimes we just have culture that's so focused on 24/7, then people who get labeled lazy mean that they just have rational self-care and they don't want to burn out. And, good for them in that case. Rude could be bold and has clear boundaries and says no and knows who they are. I love it. That definitely could be one of those things. So really, we can think about every characteristic that we tend to see as negative as potentially actually very positive. And we can uh, try to be more understanding to different kinds of people and maybe think, maybe we need to think about ourselves as being judgmental and see what we can do about that rather than just, labeling everyone else. Of course, we can say that judgmental has very specific expectations, so everything can be turned around. Yeah, so distractible, curious, open mind, just like the term raritini they came with when they were trying to use Maori culture to define ADHD. It's they have many interests rather than being distractible as a bad thing. Their attention goes to many things, and it's a neutral thing, not necessarily bad one. So you can see how this can be applied and I'm not saying that we don't have things to work on. We all have things to work on, and in different contexts. But when we are just labeling individual and say this is a bad thing, whether you are lazy or you're disorganized, that's not the most motivating place for someone. Something that's much more understanding. Okay, so let's figure out your pattern of organization and whether it makes sense. And maybe the person will say, you know what, I actually don't have a pattern and it doesn't, and nothing makes sense and I need help. Well, that would be a really good outcome. Or maybe they will explain to you how they think. And in their way of thinking, their organization actually does make sense. So let's dig a little bit deeper. And for each individual, instead of just making this generic observation from how it looks from the outsider, let's try to figure out how the person experiences their disorganization. Some people could be stressed out by it, and others are like, don't touch my piles because I know exactly where everything is. And some people feel like I can't meet deadline and it's stressing me out. Okay, so like we can work on this. And other people are like, I'm not lazy, I'm doing my own thing and accomplishing what I mean to accomplish. So how do they intrinsically perceive it, and then what's really causing it? And maybe there is an issue that could be addressed, but don't assume that you know what the person's issue is and how to fix it. It's something that we can figure out by working with the person. So yes, slow to do things. Some people can talk and stay in the speech and don't do it. That's absolutely another human characteristic. So we do have all kinds of individual characteristics. It's just not something that we can say, okay, that's just here's a box, and if you don't feed it, we're going to change you, because that would make for a very boring life. And also, there are again people who need help, but even people who all seem like they are lazy or they all seem like they're disorganized could have very different things going on the inside, and they might need completely different approach that is much better determined in collaboration with that individual. Okay, well, that was fun. Let me talk about a couple of other topics, and then we'll try to leave some place for Q&A as well. So if we are thinking, why now I can't move my slides. Okay, so one thing that we need to think about is changing people is very good sometimes not good at all, depends on their situation, but it's not the only way to think about changing. Very often it's not really about the person as much as it is about the environment. So systemic approach and removal of barriers to success is a huge part of the puzzle that sometimes people just don't think about when they say, okay, let's start changing people. Okay, wait a minute. Before we start changing people, let's figure out what's actually going on in the environment. And if all of your employees are lazy or distracted or disorganized and all need intervention, or at least, regularly someone needs intervention, it's likely that something is wrong with the system and there are systemic barriers. That was my visual that came to my brain when I just started thinking about why is there such high unemployment among autistic people? And it was, hey, job descriptions say that you have to do data analysis in a busy office with lots of distractions. Well, just doesn't make sense anyway for any person, but really turn off for autistic person. And then when you go through the hiring process, it's not always measuring something that's relevant. If you want to be a data analyst, but they want you to show perky personality, how much sense does that make? If you are expected to be a teacher, but they are just trying to test you on one particular topic, but not all the other topics you're supposed to be teaching. Well, that doesn't make any sense. A lot of our hiring really doesn't fit job descriptions, and job descriptions also need to be fixed. So our hiring process is not great. And even if you make through it, it's work environments that are noisy or just don't fit who we are, or they're too hot, too cold. There is no flexibility for your sleeping rhythm or your organization. Your coworkers are not nice to you. And if you bring up an issue, you're going to get in trouble. So there's a lack of psychological safety. And nobody knows how things work around here. And it's all behind the doors. And people are not telling you what's actually required for performance. Lack of transparency. All of those things can really derail any person, but neurodivergent people in particular. And what doesn't help is that neurodivergent people get knocked out of the process during hiring. And then during their, first week of orientation, when the learning process is not designed for them. And then later when they encounter a bully, or later when they can't get promoted because nobody tells them honestly what's required for promotion. So we'll get fewer neurodivergent people in leadership. And that encourages the cycle to continue because we don't have enough people in top echelons to advocate for neuro-inclusive change. So the lack of decision maker diversity perpetuates those barriers. But are those barriers just for autistic people? Well, no, those barriers can go can impact all kinds of people. They can impact autistic people, also first generation college graduates, people who don't have this social capital or know-how of how to work white collar jobs, for example. They can be barriers for them as well. Lack of flexibility. Yes, it's a problem for autistic people. It's a problem for people with any kind of disability. For caregivers, when you have young kids, or you're taking care of elderly, or if you are a student, if you're an adult student, lack of flexibility is an issue for everyone. And that's really kind of the idea of my book, why it's called the Canary Code. I don't know if it translates really well. There's an English expression, canary in the coal mine, and that means someone who perceives problems before others. And historically, canaries were used in coal mines. That's a historical truth. In the UK, every coal mine was required to employ 2 canaries to detect toxic gases. And so you can see this is the actual historical photo of a miner with a canary. And the second photo is a canary resuscitation device. Canaries were indeed treated as employees. They were not treated as, disposable. And they did not die as sometimes story goes. Actually, when they would see that canary is in distress because the canary would feel toxic gases before humans, because birds process oxygen on inhale and exhale, so their air metabolism is more intensive by design. It's not because they're sick or because they're weak. It's by design. It's actually what allows them to fly and to be birds. So when they would see that the canary is not doing well, they would evacuate miners, but they would also give canaries oxygen. So that little thing with a little oxygen tank is a canary resuscitation device where they would place the canaries in this little glass cage and give them oxygen. And this practice existed all the way through 1980s, when they finally replaced canaries with electronic detectors. So this practice still existed in, some people's living memory. And it is a true story. So neurodivergent people, in many cases, when we experience all those obstacles on different levels of trying to get jobs or trying to stay in a jobs, trying to be successful in jobs, those are things they're getting to other people as well. It's just neurodivergent people tend to hit more of those barriers and earlier in their careers, and then the damage accumulates to those high unemployment numbers. But those barriers are not unique to neurodivergent people. Just like, canary will feel the toxic gas, but it doesn't mean that minors are immune. It will just take a little bit longer for them to start feeling sick. So let's create better environments and help everyone work and live better and succeed, and not try to just single out neurodivergent people for improvement, because really what's good for canaries is good for minors as well. So this is my system that I talk about 6 elements that if you bring in participation and actually talk to people about how they work best and what do they need to do their best work. If we focus on outcomes and not just look, okay, you were sitting for 8 hours in your seat and we'll just consider it performance. If you can do your best work from home, why not? If you can do your work in 2 hours of hyper focus, and why not? So focusing on outcomes allows us to give people more flexibility. Organizational justice. Let's say we made a wrong assumption about someone. There needs to be a mechanism to correct those wrong decisions. That's one element of justice. Systems need to work for different people fairly. Transparency. Let's tell people what's expected of them and not just create this manipulative game that some people are better wired to understand than others. And give valid tools for decision making, for hiring. Let's test people on what they need to know for this specific job. Let's not just look at those generic characteristics we interview for that may not even apply to particular position. And if we do that across the entire employment cycle, which would be anything from creating jobs to recruitment, to hiring, to training, and then through all the parts of the employment life cycle, we'll be able to remove access barriers that prevent some people disproportionately from even getting jobs, and will also remove success barriers. And we will help people to just work in a healthier environment, thrive in the workplace, and just have a workplace where more people have opportunities to do their best work. If we're able to do something like that, we're going to not necessarily need all those specific accommodations or specific cases for neurodivergent people. We'll just create a healthier work environment where more people are able to develop their talents and breathe. So basically, this is the general framework that I use in my book. And there's another framework, and I'll show you very briefly because I'm trying to get to questions, and you will find this in my book with many different examples. But for us to feel like we're belonging in the workplace, it's not just one thing. Sometimes people say that neurodiversity is the same thing as cognitive diversity, and we need to pay attention to, cognitive differences, which is true, but it's not everything. For holistic belonging, we really need to address everything about the person. And neurodiversity also shows on various levels. So socially, we have different needs. Some people are more chatty, some people are less chatty. We shouldn't declare that too much chattiness is bad, or not having enough chattiness is bad. How about we just support multiple ways of being a human? And that way we create more social inclusion, cognitive inclusion. Yes, let's create flexible enough schedules that people who work in long chunks, like 3 to 4 hours, can thrive. And people who work in short chunks, they need 25 minutes break, 25 minutes break. Let them take breaks every 25 minutes, because that will eventually increase their productivity. Don't interrupt people who don't want to be interrupted, and let other people work in shorter chunks. And let's have meetings only, let's say, on certain days or certain parts of the day, so we don't constantly interrupt people and make people work on schedules that don't work for them. Emotional inclusion. Why do we say people things like, oh, you're so gloomy, you need to cheer up? Person is not bothering anyone. Or why are you so happy? Stop smiling. Sometimes you can hear that. Like, what is wrong with people having different kinds of emotional experience and emotional expression? We need to have workplaces that are also more emotionally inclusive. And another big part that is often forgotten in neuroinclusion and other types of inclusion is that our physical bodies are different, and some people are very sensitive to noise. Some people are very sensitive to the type of lighting, to smells, and we need to create environments where we can also have enough flexibility that if we need more light, we get light, and if we need less light, we have an opportunity to dim it so we don't get a migraine or just don't get overtired from bright lights. And where people can say, okay, not everybody wants to hear music while they're working. If you need music, have it just with headphones, and nobody else needs to hear that. And if you don't want music, well, then you can have your quiet. And let's not put, super bright colors all over the place. But if someone needs to bring something really bright to cheer them up and put it in their desk, why not? So allow people to have flexibility in how they work, and how their minds, their bodies, their whole humanness are honored in the workplace is really something that can change the way people work and the level of our well-being. So that's the last part I was going to talk about. Again, some of those things are not in my book, like the table with specific applications to coaching. A lot of other things, like the general model for health organizations and different types of belonging, are in my book, so you can check that out. And now I'm happy to go to any questions that you might have. And I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, so you can just type in my name, and it's going to come up. It's a pretty unique name. So I can see that the organizers put a couple of nice links here. The extended version of the story that I told about Charlie, and the link to my book. Any questions? Anything you would like to discuss? We have a few minutes. How do you see? Oh, you mean interaction? So everything, all the differences definitely interact. Race and gender and social economic status, everything interacts with neurodiversity. And again, my book does have all the various examples, but when societies place certain characteristics above other characteristics, so when they say that in this particular society, and I know we all come from different societies here, those particular characteristics associated with that particular race or gender, for that matter, or any other thing that you can think of, are more desirable or seen as better, or statistically much more likely to, let's say, have more affluence, then all of those things are going to interact. So if you have a neurodivergent person who is, let's say, of preferred race, preferred gender, preferred social economic status, they might still have some struggles associated with neurodivergence, maybe, sensory struggles. They might still be very sensitive to noise. But if they have more power and they say, you know what, I need everybody to quiet down, or if they're able to go into their private office or a nice house, they're not going to be stressed out as much as someone who is also seen as, who are you to make demands? And people really don't care if they say, well, I need something like I need quiet, who don't have the means to hide in a nice office or in an expensive house. It's going to make a very significant difference in their life experience. So when there are overlapping categories, which in this particular society, within a particular culture, are likely to be marginalized, the more marks of marginalization you have, the more difficult it is to navigate the life. Again, it doesn't mean that you don't experience issues with, your trauma or depression or whatever things that might come with your neurodivergence, but it does mean that there's a bit of a buffer between other factors that could make life much harder and you. So again, money or preferred race or preferred gender or preferred age or preferred appearance or whatever it is does buffer some of the negative impact of, let's say, any kind of marginalization. Let's say in this case, let's say you're autistic or you have very obvious ADHD and people are always telling you like, what is wrong with you? Then so it doesn't mean it completely eliminates those effects, but if you have layering of those effects, there are also the same characteristics are seen even more negatively because of your race, for example. You can't get access to diagnosis. That will make it harder. And we do know that, let's say, race impacts diagnosis in the States. Historically, Black and brown boys were more likely to be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder and white boys with autism, for example. So, and then you kind of how you're labeled, how you're characterized, how you're treated for a significant chunk of your life, all of those things could depend on factors such as race in your society. So every factor of difference interacts, and multiple marginalizations do tend to make your life harder.
Ludmila, estamos chegando, e pessoal, estamos chegando ao final do nosso tempo. Queria agradecer imensamente pela sua presença, Ludmila, e a todos que estiveram aqui ouvindo a Ludmila, refletindo. Vamos compartilhar agora no chat o link para que vocês possam avaliar o nosso evento e se registrarem para que vocês possam receber as CCUs. Então, queria agora encerrar a nossa sessão, agradecer grandemente a presença da Ludmila, que trouxe conceitos tão esclarecedores e que vão nos ajudar a atuar ainda mais efetivamente enquanto coach diante de uma pessoa neurodiversa. Vamos compartilhar também no site para aqueles que estão presentes e que não são coaches ou que ainda não se associaram à ICF, o link para a associação. E lembrando também que temos uma oportunidade de trabalho com coaching pro bono na Ensina Brasil, agora aqui na ICF. Ludmila, meus agradecimentos profundos e aguardo vocês numa próxima palestra da International Coaching Week. Any final words, Ludmila, you would like to share before we close?
You've been very kind. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and my very best wishes to everyone here. Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Obrigado, pessoal. Vou deixar a sala um pouco mais aberta para que vocês possam acessar os links e a pesquisa de feedback. E nos vemos numa próxima.
Thank you very much. Thank you.